Hello, Psych 101 students. Welcome to Module 6, Chapter 12, Learning Objective 5. We will conclude the big question, how do other people influence you, by looking at obedience and how you may hurt or help others. Let's begin. So, Milgram's classic experiment on obedience is summarized in the Methods of Psychology feature on page 488 of your textbook. It looks like this. Make sure you read it over. I'm not going to go over this now because I will be covering it during upcoming slides, but make sure you do read through it and make sure you understand the setup and the procedure and the results. So obedience is adherence to orders from those of higher authority. And so this could be, following instructions from a teacher or from your parent when you're a child, or from your boss at work or the police. It could be disrobing when you're told to by your doctor. He's the authority in that situation. It might be sitting down when a professor tells you to, or sitting down when a bus driver tells you to on the bus. So in each situation, in different situations, different people are authority figures. And obedience is when you follow their instructions and comply with their orders or their commands. It can produce trouble when people stop asking questions about why they're behaving as others want them to. You shouldn't always mindlessly follow authority. It can lead to disastrous results at times. Make sure you always, question, why am I doing this? Do I really need to follow these instructions? Is it in my best interest to do so? Okay, so let's get to Milgram's experiment. Stanley Milgram was a child of Jewish parents who grew up during World War II. He was also a student of Solomon Asch. He was the one that did the conformity study with those lines of different sizes. And Milgram wanted to know how the Holocaust could have occurred. How could so many people follow instructions and be obedient, to do such horrible things? So he designed an experiment to test the influence of obedience and authority on normal people. And this became a landmark study. In fact, it's considered one of the most influential studies in the history of psychology. So we'll go through the Milgram paradigm. Paradigm just refers to like an experimental model, a certain type of experimental setup. So let's go through Milgram's paradigm. First of all, he recruited subjects through a newspaper ad, and the subjects were paid $4.50 to participate. These voluntary subjects were taken to a lab, and they were introduced to a fellow volunteer. So it was like you would go to the study, and there was another supposed subject also there. This other volunteer was named Mr. Wallace. He was actually a Confederate. He was in on the study, so there was only really one subject. But when you showed up, you would believe that there was actually two subjects. You get introduced to the researcher as well. His name was Mr. Williams. He was wearing a white lab coat. There was a random drawing to determine which of the two subjects, you and Mr. Wallace, would be the teacher and which one would be the learner. Well, the drawing was actually rigged. I mean, you would pick a slip of paper out of a hat, and and there'd be two slips of paper, and you would get to pick one, and you would open it up, and it would say teacher. In fact, both slips of paper said teacher, but Mr. Wallace, the other, supposed subject, he would always say that his said learner. So it was set so you would the actual subject would always be the teacher. The Confederate, Mr. Wallace, would always be the learner. And the teacher, the subject, is explained that you were supposed to shock the learner when they did not successfully repeat the correct words in what's called a paired associates task. Uh, Basically, the the teacher gives a list of word pairs. It might be like strong arm, uh, blue sky, black curtain. I don't know. Uh, clean window or whatever. I mean, like, so it's like you get a set of word pairs, and then he'll give you one word, and you have to pick the word that went with it. So if the word was strong, you would have to choose arm because strong and arm went together, and and this was the task, and the idea was that like every time the learner misses one, they get shocked. uh, and each time with each failure, with each wrong answer, the shock level will increase. uh, so these are actual pictures from the original study. One of the first things they do is let me zoom in here. One of the first things they do is that this here is Mr. Wallace, the Confederate, who the actual subject would think is another subject. He gets strapped into this chair, and some shocking apparatus gets placed on his arm, or on his arm there, and it's like you need to be strapped in for your own protection, and so that we know that the shocks are being delivered, and so the actual subject is witnessing Mr. Wallace here again strapped in, and at this point the learner, Mr. Wallace, he tells the researcher and the teacher, the actual subject, that he has a slight heart condition, and this is before the experiment started, and he's worried. He says, I'm worried. Like, I have a heart condition. Are these shocks going to interfere with that? And the researcher in the white lab coat says, well, while somewhat painful, the shocks will do no lasting damage. And he says, okay, I'll go along with this. And then the subject and researcher go to an adjoining room, and you can see them in these left two pictures. You can see in the top left picture that's the subject sitting down, and that's the researcher in the lab coat. I guess maybe it's not quite a white lab coat, but he's in the lab coat, and so he's the authority figure. And the researcher introduces the subject to an ominous looking shock generator shown here in the bottom right picture. So you can see there's a whole series of switches. They range from 0 volts up to 450 volts, and each of these switches goes up 15 volts. So it goes like 0, 15, 30, 45, 60, etc., all the way up to 450. So in total there's 30 switches on the shock switches on this machine, and there's labels. You can't really see them in this picture, but there's some labels um, along the way. I think they're along the bottom here, and so the labels say things like, starting with the lower shocks, it says slight shock, and then you move up and it gets up to moderate shock. And then later on, it gets up to danger, severe shock. And the very last label is just three X's, triple X, near the last switches. So, after a while, the learner, they start the test, and the teacher gives the word pairs. The learner has to make their answer, and the learner has it's like a multiple choice. He has four switches. He has to pick number 1, 2, 3, or 4. So it's like a multiple choice test. And originally he's getting them right for a while, but then he starts to miss some of the answers, and the shocking begins. The subject, the actual subject, the guy doing the shocking, the teacher, he first hears something when they get up to 75 volts. He hears the learner, from the adjoining room. He hears him grunting, like it hurt him. So it's a sound of pain. And so that's the first time he hears it is at 75 volts. Remember, this goes up to 450. So there's multiple times afterwards where he hears sounds of pain, and then he hears, he starts hearing the learner eventually like yelling. But what happens is once the subject actually first starts hearing any sounds of pain, usually at that first point at 75 volts, most subjects would turn to the researcher, and they would be like, should I continue? Like, it sounds like it hurt him, and the researcher tells the teacher to continue. Here's some actual auditory of one of the subjects saying, like, I don't want to go ahead, but the researcher, the authority figure, tells him to continue. So let me play this.
The experiment requires that you continue, teacher.
Yeah, but I'm not going to get that man sick of that. I mean, he's hollering there. You know what I mean?
Whether the learner likes it or not, we must go on until he's learned all the word pairs.
I refuse to take the responsibility of him getting hurt in there. He's on there hollering.
It's absolutely essential that you continue, teacher.
So you can hear that the researcher urges him to go on. It's absolutely essential that you continue, and what most subjects did is that they would listen to the researcher and then continue, even though they knew that there was something wrong here and that they probably shouldn't be doing it, or they didn't want to do it, but because he's the authority figure here, if he urges them on, they continue. By the time they get up to 330 volts, the learner in the adjoining room is yelling loudly, "Let me out of here." I have some more audio to play here. It's pretty drastic. So here we go.
330 volts.
Let me out of here. Let me out of here. My heart's bothering me.
Actually.
Let me out. Let me out of here. You have no right to hold me here. Let me out. Let me out. Let me out.
Excellent. Fast.
Let me out.
Okay, so oops. Okay, so the Confederate, the learner, he's clearly letting it be known that he does not want to continue. He wants to be let out. You hear him yell out after he gets shocked, and this is what this was meant to, to provoke, some empathy and sympathy in the teacher, and when you hear that, you think, oh, I'm not going to keep hurting this person who's yelling out, "Let me out of here." And he says, he mentions again that he has a heart issue, and he's obviously it's hurting him. Anyways, so you would think, your first thought is you're not going to keep shocking this guy. Anyways, by 345 volts, he actually goes silent, which is even more disturbing. He stops yelling after the shocks, and he goes silent. he stops even answering the questions. And what the researcher tells the subject is that he's to, a non-answer is the same as a wrong answer, and he's to continue the shocks if the learner fails to respond. So after 345 volts, all the way up to the maximum 450 volts, there's no more responses. And as the subject, you're supposed to keep reading the word pairs and waiting for a response, and then you keep increasing the shocks. And the guy's not even responding. I mean, you got to be pretty worried by this point. Okay. Oops. Okay. So before this study started, Milgram asked psychiatrists, college sophomores, middle-class adults, and graduate students, and as well as professors in the behavioral sciences, to offer predictions about the results. And this here shows, this green line here shows the predictions. The overall prediction was that fewer than 1 in 10% of participants in the Milgram experiments would obey completely and provide the maximum level of shock. So this is like 1 in 1,000. Less than 1/10% is 1 in 1,000 people said that someone would shock all the way up to the 30th level. So sorry, let me just look my notes here. So their predictions were obviously incorrect. As you can see in this red bar at the top here, these were the actual results. 65% of subjects were obedient all the way to the last level. 65% people kept shocking this person that was yelling, and then eventually went silent, all the way up to the maximum voltage. So there was this. This is why this is considered such a landmark study. The results were completely unpredictable. I mean, they had experts. They had, these psychiatrists and these professors, psychology professors, and as well as just regular people like making predictions. And the predictions were always that it would take like a psychopath or a sociopath to shock all the way to the end. That was what the predictions were. And yet we find that over half the people of just regular adults went to the top, to the last level. Shocking. So the results were so unpredictable, completely unpredictable, that this is why it's considered such an important landmark study, is that no one would have thought that this would have happened. Normal adults continued shocking another human, even though this other human was yelling in pain, and it was just because a researcher kept telling them to. A reason, and they were getting paid $4.50 to participate. They were allowed to quit the experiment at any time, which is true of any study that you're in, and yet they just kept listening to the researcher, and they kept shocking the guy, and demonstrating this high level of obedience. Okay. A recent replication of the study found that 70%. And some people said perhaps it was, the time period that this was conducted in, so many decades ago, and perhaps things would be different now. But as it shows here, a recent replication found that 70% of participants were obedient up to the maximum strength in the experiment. This experiment has generated a lot of discussion about ethics. Many people think that Milgram's experiment was very unethical. Understand that no one actually gets shocked in this study. So that, Mr. Wallace is in on the experiment. He's in the adjoining room. He's actually recorded all of those responses of him yelling, "Let me out of here," and, yelling in pain. And they get played after certain shocks. He plays the recording. So every subject actually hears the same set of responses coming from the adjoining room. So he's not, no one's actually getting shocked. But the subjects that were delivering the shocks, they showed considerable signs of extreme anxiety and stress throughout the experimental sessions. It was not, even though they were obedient and kept shocking, it was not easy for any of these subjects. They displayed a lot of signs of extreme anxiety and stress. And this is why it's considered, many people say it was unethical, that it's what these subjects had to go through, and also, like, what they learned about themselves and what they would have to think about once they left the experiment, that they kept shocking this person. And so, people have complained that it could cause real psychological damage in the subjects to go through this ordeal of shocking another person. Milgram tried to address some of these concerns. Like, for instance, after the experiment, he would always make sure the subjects met up with Mr. Wallace, the guy that was supposedly getting the shocks, and he would say, "Yeah, I'm perfectly fine. I was never really shocked." Like, just show them that there was no harm actually done, but it was still a real ordeal for these subjects to go through. Okay, this last bit, rethinking Milgram's research. Make sure you read that section on your own in the textbook. I'm not going to cover it here. Okay, so that's Milgram's classic experiment. Oh yeah, we actually have a little bit more here. Still, there was two key themes that emerged from follow-up studies. Milgram actually conducted a series of these studies where he would change conditions. So the first theme is that the greater the psychological distance between the teacher and the experimenter, the less the obedience. And I'll just mention one of the other conditions. Like, he did a condition where the experimenter wasn't in the room with the subject who was delivering the shocks. He would actually talk to him by phone instead of in person. And in that condition, otherwise it was the same. He would urge them to continue, but he was doing it by phone. In that condition, only 30% of the subjects continue shocking all the way to the end, compared with 65%. So, because the person given the commands wasn't right there with you, there was a greater distance between you, psychological distance, people were less likely to comply with his orders. The second theme is the greater the psychological distance between the teacher and the learner, so the one shocking and the one being shocked, the more the obedience. So remember, in the original experiment, he's in another room. You don't actually see him getting shocked. You just hear the sounds coming. So there's some distance between you. But when he did a condition where the learner was actually in the same room as the subject, so you could actually see him when he got shocked, compliance went down to 40% all the way till the end. So from 65%, it went down to 40% that would keep shocking him. Still, it's a high number, but it did reduce it somewhat because you had to actually witness it. It made it more real. There was less psychological distance. There was another condition where the teacher, the subject, had to actually hold down the learner's hand on the shock plate whenever he delivered the shock. So now you're like right up close and touching him, like you'd probably feel even more responsible. So in that condition, the percent went down to 30% that continued shock until the end. Once again, still high, but a reduction. And then he did one condition where he increased the distance, where the subject didn't actually have to flip the shock switches himself. There was another person that was responsible for flipping the switches. So the actual subject, the teacher, he would have to tell this other guy when to flip the switches, the shock switches. In that case, the results increased up to 93%, went all the way, because this increased your distance from, like, I'm actually doing this. It's like I'm not the one throwing the switches. I'm just saying when it happens. So you get almost, full compliance. 93% of them we keep shocking because they would feel like, well, it's not up to me. This other guy's throwing the switches. I'm just giving the orders. Anyway, so there was a lot of very important findings coming from this series of studies. Okay, let's look at aggression. Um, it's any behavior that involves the intention to harm someone. So obviously, it's not considered aggression if you accidentally hurt somebody else. So it's not enough just that you harm somebody. It has to be intentional to be considered aggression. And similarly, even if you don't hurt somebody, it's the intention that matters. So if I throw a punch at somebody and I miss, I'm still obviously aggressive. So if you intend to harm somebody, it's considered aggression. Biology and the situation affect aggression. Let's start with biology. The biology of aggression has been studied primarily in non-human animals. Several lines of evidence suggest that serotonin, one of our neurotransmitters, is especially important in the control of aggressive behavior. So serotonin helps you to control aggression. So if you have lower levels of serotonin, this tends to lead to higher levels of aggression. So there is some biology involved in who's likely to become aggressive or not. There's also situational factors, and we have what's called the frustration aggression hypothesis. The more frustrated we feel, the more likely we are to act aggressively. I think most people kind of know this, but this is what this hypothesis states. Frustration leads to aggression, and what causes frustration? Well, the blocking of a goal. And so it could be I'm trying to get to work on time, and there's traffic that's slowing me down. So if my goal is being blocked and I can't get to work on time, then it's going to cause me to get frustrated, which makes it more likely that I'm going to act aggressively. So we do certainly see this in, when traffic is heavy and drivers often start feeling frustrated. That's when they're more likely to behave aggressively, which may include yelling at other drivers or displaying road rage. These incidents of road rage and bad highway behavior, it typically results from situations where people are getting frustrated because they're trying to meet a certain goal. They're trying to get somewhere on time, and the traffic is blocking them. So frustration often leads to aggression. There are also social and cultural factors that affect aggression. Aggression may be part of human nature, but society and culture influence people's tendencies to commit acts of physical violence. So you see this chart here, these numbers are from 2012, and this is displaying the murder rate for various countries. You can see that the murder rates are much higher in certain countries compared to others. And so this tells us that the society that people live in and grow up in, can affect their aggression tendencies. So if you, live in Venezuela, you're much more likely to be aggressive than if you grow up and live in Japan, for instance. So this tells us it's not all, genetics or biology, or it's partially our socialization, what you're taught within a society, within a culture. You can see in the United States, some people might find it surprising that we're actually below the global average, but understand that there are some countries that have a lot of violence, so it kind of raises the average. And I'm happy to see that Canada's below the U.S. Okay, anyways, that's my own personal thing, but let's keep going. So that's aggression. Kind of on the other side of things is looking at positive behaviors, or what's known as pro-social behaviors. which is acting in a way that tends to benefit others. Pro-social behaviors include such things as offering assistance, doing favors, paying compliments, resisting the temptation to insult others, or simply being pleasant and cooperative. These are all considered pro-social behaviors. Altruism refers to the act of providing help when it's needed with no apparent reward for doing so. People are most altruistic towards those whose genes they share. This is one of our basic needs as an animal. It's to pass on our genes. This is true of any organism, any animal or humans. It's kind of built within us that we have a need. We have a need to pass our genes on, and this is why we are more likely to help those who we share genes with. If I help somebody that has, some of the same genes I have, like this would include, a parent or a sibling or a child or even like a cousin or an aunt or an uncle, like anyone that I'm blood related to has genes in common with me. So if I help them, in a sense, I'm helping to pass on, my genes because they have some of the same genes that I do. And so this is kind of built into the basic genetics of any living creature, animal, or organism. It's to pass your genes on. And so this is why we help those much more that we're related to. And think about it, like you're in a lifeboat situation, there's one more spot, and I mean, who are you gonna choose? Are you gonna choose your brother or some random other kid? I mean, like, it's you're gonna try to help the people that you're closest to, the ones that you're related to. Okay. There's also what's called reciprocal helping, where one animal helps another because the other may return the favor in the future. And this just makes good sense, and we see this in many, throughout many species in the animal kingdom, and it's also true of humans. Like I may help you move your furniture because I know I'm going to be moving at some point in the future, and I know that, and then I can ask you to help me. So we help others sometimes because we think, eventually they'll return the favor and help us. Oops. Okay, the final topic is the bystander effect, and this all starts with the case of Kitty Genovese. This is from 1964. Kitty was stabbed and killed during a 35-minute time span, so it wasn't quick. I mean, like if you read about it, I mean, like the attacker stabbed her and then left for a little bit, and they came back and stabbed her some more. And like it took a half hour up or 35 minutes to from start to finish for this attacker to kill Kitty Genovese. During this time, she screamed and pleaded for help. This was happening outdoors. There were many apartment windows facing the location where she was killed. And it was originally reported, as you can see here, it was originally reported that 38 people witnessed the murder and did not call the police. Because lights apparently were coming on in some of the windows, and so this was the original newspaper report. 38 people saw her get killed, and no one called the police or offered help. This case is what provoked the research on what's come to be known as the bystander effect. How could so many people watch this kind of thing happening and not do anything to help, not even like call the police? It turns out that this initial newspaper report was incorrect. There was further research done. Apparently it wasn't really 38 people, but they did confirm that at least a half dozen and maybe more heard heard some of the commotion, heard some of the screaming and commotion that went on. And eventually, there was further research showed that one or two people did finally call the police at some point, but it was too late. So even though the initial newspaper report was incorrect, I mean, it caused an outrage. Like, how could this happen? And this is what led to psychologists saying, we've got to study this. How could 38 people witness a crime and not do anything? And so Latane and Darley were the two researchers that really tackled this issue, and they conducted a series of studies. I think three main studies, like three main different studies they conducted that looked at this bystander effect. And what the results showed in all the studies was that a person is less likely to help someone else if they are in a group compared to if they're alone. So if you're witnessing somebody that needs help and you're by yourself, you're more likely to help them than if you witness it and you're within a group of people. And so this was certainly a case of a group of people. There's lots of windows that were facing where Kitty got murdered. So this bystander effect, applies here. Like that people were less likely to help because there was other people that could help. The larger the group, the less likely each individual is to help. In one of their studies called the smoke study, we'll take a look at that. Where's my notes? Oh, participants were asked to wait with two calm Confederates or with two other real participants. There's three conditions, or alone. So you're in a room, you're either alone or you're with two other people. Sometimes the two other people are also real subjects, or in the other condition, they're actually Confederates. Okay. Anyways, what happens is that you're in this room and you're all instructed that you have to fill out some forms. So you're all sitting like at this table and you're filling out your forms, and all of a sudden smoke starts coming in from underneath the door, and the smoke starts like billowing in, and it starts to fill the room. And I mean, it's not. It's kind of slowly. It's coming in and collecting, but it's obvious that there's smoke coming into the room from underneath one of the closed doors. This graph here shows the results of the study. So let's start with it. This is the first condition is the actual subject was with two Confederates, two people that were part of the experiment. And the two people that were part of the experiment, they purposely remained calm throughout the whole time that the smoke was coming in. And what these bars show is the percent of people that seeked, so that looked, asked for help or notified somebody either within 3 minutes or within 6 minutes of the smoke starting to come in the room. And you can see it's down around like 10% of them responding within 3 or 6 minutes. It's only about 1 out of 10 people. And so they're sitting, remember, they're sitting with two other people that are remaining calm. And so most people did not think they needed to get up to help or to ask for help or look for assistance. When there was 3 actual subjects together, so they should all be worried. They're all actual subjects, and you can see that it's similar that only about 10% respond within 3 minutes, but by the time it gets up to 6 minutes, about 40% of subjects asked for assistance or looked for help. But still less than half. But when it was just one participant alone in the room and the smoke's coming in, you can see the results are much, much higher. So, almost 60% are asking for help within 3 minutes, compared with 10% in these conditions. And within 6 minutes, it looks like 75 or 80% of them are asking for help. So, much, much higher response. And this is the bystander effect, that when you're with other people, you're much less likely um, to respond to a situation where some kind of assistance is needed or help is needed. But when you're alone, you're much quicker to respond, or much more likely to respond. Well, why does this effect exist? Let's go to our final slide here. Years of research on this have indicated 4 major reasons for the bystander effect intervention. First one is that bystanders expect other bystanders to help. This is known as diffusion of responsibility, which is a reduction of feelings of personal responsibility in the presence of others. So when you're with others, you feel less responsible. Responsibility is diffused among you. It's like, and the more people, the more responsibility is diffused. I mean, if you're in a group of 100 witnessing somebody that needs help, you'd be thinking, oh, somebody should do something. Why isn't anyone do something? I mean, like, each person go think, somebody else should be doing something. And but if you're by yourself, it's like, oh, this person needs help. I better do something. I'm the only one here. And you can imagine that how the difference in feeling if you're in a crowd versus being alone, and help is needed. This is somewhat similar to social loafing. Remember, like, if the bigger the group, the more people loaf, and like, people tend to do less work in a bigger group. And so it's a similar diffusion of responsibility idea. Well, I'm in a big group that's building this house. Is I don't know, 50 of us building this house. Like, I don't really have to do that much, and the house will still get built. But when you're by yourself, you feel responsible for whatever you need to do. So each individual expects others to step forward and help. Okay, number 2, people fear making social blunders in ambiguous situations. If we're not completely sure that someone needs help, we tend to be very hesitant to intervene with others. It's just, we're in a country where you know I don't know, I don't mean to sound crass, but like, we're in a country of an individualist country where kind of the assumption is other people's problems are their problems. Um, we're not, in a collectivist culture, this would be less true, but we're in an individualistic country, so we kind of think people should handle their own problems. So if you're not sure, if there's any doubt, people usually are hesitant to go and intervene in somebody else's issues. So if you are ever in a situation needing help, don't assume that others realize this. You have to make it perfectly clear that you need help. I mean, if you need help, like, yell the word, yell for help. Like, make it really clear. Um, um, and don't ever assume, like, obviously, like, people can see I obviously need help. So, okay, that's number 2. Number 3 is people are less likely to help when we are anonymous and can remain so. So the more anonymous you feel, the less likely you are to help. If you're in need, well, actually, before I get to that, for instance, like, you would be more likely to help. Let's say I'm with somebody that knows me. Maybe my wife and I are out, and I see somebody that needs help. I mean, I'm not completely anonymous because I know that, oh, she's here with me, and my wife. Like, I better help, so she thinks more highly of me. Like, it's. But if I'm by myself, I'm more anonymous. Like no one here knows me. Like, if the feeling is that no one knows you in this bunch of people that you're with, like, you're just in a crowd or something, then it's like, I know I can walk away without doing anything, and it's not going to have any repercussions later. But so when you can't be identified, when no one knows you, and when you're anonymous, you're much less likely to help in the situation. So this also kind of gives us some clue as what we should do when we need help. Let's say that you are in need and there are multiple people present. It's actually best that you ask a single bystander for help than to ask the group as a whole. So I mentioned earlier, make sure it's clear, yell help and whatnot. What's even better is to identify one person, like not by name. You don't know who they are, but yell to somebody like, "Hey, you in the yellow shirt." Yeah, get their attention so that they look at you. Yeah, I need help over here. You in the yellow shirt. And all of a sudden, they're much less anonymous. It's like they've been identified in a sense. They've been picked out of the crowd. And that person is much more likely to help you than if they just hear you yelling, "Help, help, help." So this is a little clue. When if there's multiple people around, pick one of them and say, "You, like with the glasses or whatever, identify one person. I need help." And this makes somebody feel more responsible. They're asking me in particular. Okay. And finally, number 4, we're deciding whether to help involves weighing 2 factors. How much personal harm do you risk by helping someone? And what benefits might you have to forego if we help? So people are less likely to help if it puts them at risk at all, or if they have to give up something in order to help. So, first thing we think of is it, am I risking my life, or am I risking my harm to myself? But also the other part of this, the second part of this is like what you have to give up. Like, let's say you're on your way to a job interview, or you're on your way to a final exam. And I mean, to stop to help somebody might cost you a great deal. Like you might, if you stop to help this person that needs assistance at the side of the road, like you're gonna miss your final exam, or you're gonna miss that job interview, or what whatever it might be. So if we feel like we're gonna be giving up a lot, then that makes it less likely that we're gonna help. And that will conclude learning objective 5 and conclude our look at chapter 12.